there's no such thing as work-life balance. You get the most joy out of your work and your life when you find that opportunity for that work-life mashup.
Lori Bush.
Lori Bush is a woman committed to the science of skincare.
A beauty and wellness entrepreneur, founder of Solvasa Integrative Beauty.
Prior to that, she was the president and CEO of Rodan & Fields, where she grew the company to over $1 billion in sales.
You're an icon for so many women.
Everything that I wanted to do, I took it on myself.
And if we seek to find real meaning in our work, we need to start with a very personal why.
Intention over habit, attitude over age, and presence over everything.
I started learning a lot about the gender cultural dynamics in business. They're very subconscious, but they are very much hardwired. A woman will show up and be fully qualified, but express a lot of self-doubt. So women tend to pull themselves down a little bit.
What advice would you give to women out there that are struggling with some sort of bias in the workplace?
Oh gosh.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Vinny Vidi Vici Show. I am here with Lori Bush, who's the co-founder and CEO of Solvasa. She's also on the board of Tupperware, and she was the CEO previously of Rodan & Fields, a multi-billion-dollar skincare company, which she built literally from the ground up. She's faced tons of adversity in her life, including overcoming cancer. And she's a role model to thousands and tens of thousands of women out there who look up to her and have been just huge supporters of her and her endeavors as clients and as partners in her business. So she's an amazing person. We're going to dig into some really great details, and I'm excited to have you in the studio, Lori.
Hey, Vinny, it's really fun to be back with you and doing something together again.
Absolutely. Let's just touch on that. We met 11 years ago now?
Yeah, basically in a parking lot.
Yeah.
Vinny followed me out. You followed me out to the parking lot one day at the Alliance of CEOs meeting. You were just back, I think, from South Africa.
Yep.
First time I met you. I had put a case out in front of everybody about my challenges of taking on the one part of the business at the time that I felt that I couldn't myself do, which was really the consumer interface on tech, the user interface on tech. And so I was putting that out there as sort of my case in building this tech infrastructure. And you followed me out to the parking lot and said, I can help you. I think we were in Sebastopol, California or something. And the best part of it was the way you defined yourself. I asked you to come in and just shadow me and help me understand the Internet of Things. And we ultimately defined you as I think you defined yourself as my Joe Black. So everybody is wondering who this guy is following me around. And I oftentimes had you like as a stealth visitor on conference calls, texting me messages and things. That was really great.
I used to sit in some of the board meetings or at least the executive team meetings. It was very strange. It was definitely the Meet Joe Black type situation. And it was fun.
It was really fun.
It was fun. It was good old days. So Laura, you back then you were running Rodan & Fields, which I watched you grow that business from when I joined there was 30 people, I think.
It was about the size of it.
Yeah, Maiden Lane, and then it grew to billions of dollars by the time.
Yeah, well, when I exited, we had just hit the $1 billion run rate, which was just the feather in my cap. But I think the most fun thing was that somewhere out there was this. Somebody said something once where I built the company from 50 million to $1 billion, which was kind of funny because we never actually had a $50 billion a year. And the thing that the 0 to 50 was actually the more difficult part than the 50 to $1 billion. But when we actually, on our 4th anniversary, we hit the $100 million run rate. And you had helped introduce me to Yammer, and we implemented Yammer in the company. And that morning I came in and I wrote for our happy 4th anniversary to everybody. And I said they said we'd hit 100 million run rate in 4 years when pigs fly. And then I had my management team running around the company later that day shooting off these flying, oinking pigs. So those are the kind of fun things we did back in those early days.
It was really
fun
great.
Days of building a company.
It was great to be there. It was actually a very opportune time for me. I had come off my previous company. I was starting Gift, the gift card platform, and I was on a startup salary, so I wasn't making a lot of cash from Gift. And you were like, "Hey, can you consult a couple of days a week?" And that actually helped a lot pay the bills back in those days, because it was. And so I'm always very grateful and thankful to you having me there.
Learned a lot from you, and hopefully we helped you launch some really amazing things going forward.
Thank you. It was great. So I think I want to start a little bit back. And let's go back to your background so people get a sense of where you're from before we jump into the really meaty stuff. But do you just walk us through where you were born and how you got into skincare? I know you were a VP at Neutrogena, which is pretty amazing. So when you were very young at the time, weren't you one of the youngest? I think
one of the youngest VPs and one of the only female VPs at the time. Which,
absolutely.
Yeah, that changed over time, which was a good thing. Yeah. But going back, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Fun fact about that: I went to high school, and Cleveland Heights High, and Heights High has become kind of well known these days. Back in 2018, I was inducted into the Heights High Hall of Fame, along with, wait for it, Jason and Travis Kelce. So, and so they have their podcast, New Heights, and a lot of nod back to the Cleveland Heights area.
Did you ever meet him?
Which was what?
Did you ever meet him?
I have photos with him. We were literally inducted into the Hall of Fame together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't even know who they were at that time, really. But
you saw Taylor in the background?
What? No, that was back in 2018, right before Jason got his ring. It was funny. I was at Temple University just this past weekend, or last Friday, where I'm on the board of visitors for the business school, and I was in a little coffee shop there, and there was at the checkout counter there was a tip jar. Mm-hmm. There was two coffee mugs, and one said Travis and the other one said Jason Kelce, and you were supposed to put your tip in their favorite. And of course it was Philadelphia, so the Travis cup had like 20 cents in it, and the Jason cup was full of dollars. So that was fine. But I'm from Cleveland. I grew up. I'm Jewish. Interesting time to be Jewish these days. That was part of the reason I was back at Temple in the business school, because I endow a fund there for female leadership, female entrepreneurship. And I just wanted to have a talk about some of the values and things that are going on campus these days. There's a new dean that I was involved in the committee to bring him on board. And, that's weighing heavily on me these days, what's going on our college campuses. And
well, you want to just maybe take a second and just go... let's go with that for a second.
Yeah, well, one of the things when I retired or attempted to retire from Rodan and Fields, and I wanted to, and I sold my interest in the company back, and it was a lovely event. Pretty much took care of my future and my retirement. Or my attempted retirement, and I wanted to do something to give back. And I went to business school. I got my graduate degree at Temple, undergrad Ohio State, go Bucks, and so I was asked to work with the Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and I decided to endow a fund that would be like a seed fund for entrepreneurs. I just love working with people who have vision and who are courageous and willing to take things on. The school wanted me to focus the fund on female entrepreneurs. And then they had to actually convince me to do that, because I just believe anybody with a great idea, I want to support and get them off the ground. But the convincing was that females have a little bit more time raising money. And some of it is just the way the female brain is wired and how they approach things. But some of it is also the bias in business and the male competitive model and all that, things I like to speak on. I've been involved in working with some amazing young visionary entrepreneurs who are female. I agreed to go with the female route. But, what's going on right now on with this element of anti-Semitism and things that are hard for me to fathom, and things that I didn't. I knew there was always some level of it, but I never imagined that in 21st century America. I'm at my very core an optimist, and I believe in all the positivity and the human spirit and human nature. And I never wanted to believe that we can get to a place like where we are today. And so given that I'm endowing this fund and I was in Philadelphia, I really wanted to spend some time on campus with the director of development and the new dean, who is amazing. I really like him a lot. And to just have a discussion about, within the context of that university, how they're approaching DEI. I was delighted to learn that the head of DEI is Jewish and her husband's a rabbi, because I think, DEI has come to represent almost the antithesis of what the letters stand for. And so that was weighing very heavily on me. So I was back there. But going back to female leadership and how I got to where I was and started my life in Cleveland, Ohio. We don't want to go too deep into my childhood, otherwise it'll turn into a therapy session. But
For most people, that's probably true.
Yeah. You met my mother at one point in time. My mother passed away in April, and I had a very interesting relationship with my mother. She had a lot of the hallmarks of what today would be called narcissistic personality syndrome. But back then I didn't know what it was. I just knew that, the values that she represented weren't consistent with who I wanted to be when I grew up. My father was a little bit different. He was kind of badass and kind of crunchy on the outside with a soft, chewy center. And so a lot of the values that I grew up with were his values, but he died young. And so a lot of what my life has been about was, on one hand, trying to make my mother happy, which was almost an impossible task, and the other hand, trying to live up to the expectations that my father had for me. And sadly, he never lived to see, how my life ultimately evolved or meet his grandchild.
Well, I'm sure he'd be very proud of you now.
I know he would be, and I pay a lot of tribute to him. My personal businesses are generally named after him. My vineyard, I live on a beautiful vineyard in Northern California now, that we call Gremlin Vines. And where Gremlin came from was my father, when he was in the military, was my maiden name was Hermelin, and he became known as Hermelin the Gremlin. And then it just became the Gremlin, and then it was shortened to Grem. So his nickname through life was, in his adult life, was Grem. So I name everything after Gremlin, and you'll see that appearing on some of my social media stuff and my email addresses. But anyway, I think part of dealing with a narcissistic mother who really didn't invest herself in us. She invested in herself. And my father, who I think had some regrets in life that he didn't, pursue a higher education and things like that. Those values led me to be very, very independent in many ways when I was young, reflecting on it. And I think back to things I did that were, in this day and age, crazy. So when I was young, I loved roller skating, and I took figure skating lessons on roller skates, which is close to being a useless hobby at the end of the day. But I loved roller skating. But to go to my lessons and roller skate, when I was in the third grade, I would get on a city bus and go and take my roller skating lessons. And then I decided I wanted to get into archery at one point. So I got on a city bus and I went to take archery. And everything that I wanted to do, I pretty much took it on myself, and never really had the support of my parents so much. My father working, my mother also worked. So when we moved away, when I couldn't access some of those things by bus, I had to give them up and not go further. But I think that aspect of seeking to do something, to learn something, to develop some skills. And having to be really self-motivated and self-actualizing on all of it became pretty material in terms of a lot of the decisions and career decisions I made in my life and personal decisions as well.
Okay, so when you left home, you pursued a degree. What did you study?
So undergrad, I studied medical technology. I excelled in kind of the STEM classes. I was actually, I wanted to go to Boston University because I just wanted to get away from Cleveland, and I thought it would be really cool. And I was recruited actually by MIT because I scored really well in math on my SATs, and but I didn't want to go to MIT because that didn't sound like it would be so much fun. So I really wanted to go to school in Boston, but I ended up at Ohio State because Ohio State kind of rolled out the red carpet for me as an honors student, and at Boston I would have had to fund it as a private school in some way. And my parents, we were lower middle class family at the time, and my parents weren't willing to mortgage their house to send me to college, so I pretty much defaulted to Ohio State, which was really an amazing, wonderful experience. But I was heading down the path of pre-med, and this was in the mid-1970s. And I would say a third of the freshman class at Ohio State was pre-med. And it was very competitive, and I ultimately got kind of off track in a weird way at the university where I had too many credit hours to stay in the path I was on. So the school had actually asked me to, I guess the term would be unmatriculate for a while and go as a continuing ed student because of not having the qualifications to go through the program I wanted to go through, but having too many hours to stay as a freshman or a sophomore. It was a very weird thing. And I just got kind of fed up with the academic structure of things. And so I decided to downshift, get a degree in medical technology so that I could just get through school and then figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And for a short time, I regretted not sticking the route of pre-med. And then I ultimately had the opportunity to go to medical school handed to me on a platter because of some work I was doing career-wise. And I ultimately decided that that I didn't have the patience to be a service-oriented person in the medical community. And so I decided to pursue product development initially in the medical space to start.
And you built your career you basically built your career in skincare.
Ultimately, I started off actually doing product development in diagnostic medicine. And that was a really material thing for me because I was working in a particular area and I was given the opportunity to do some pretty amazing things very early on in my career to develop tests at a clinical laboratory that I was working in initially. And I was able to travel to like the Mayo Clinic or the Centers for Disease Control and work with some of the leaders in the space I was working in, which was thrombosis and hemostasis. That's basically clotting. I was a clotter. And I would learn, I would go to see how they were doing things, and I would always think to myself, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And so, and I'm kind of a cook. I like to cook and invent recipes. And so I would just really try to find an easier way to simplify what I was learning to do so that I could make it more practical and implement it. And so I was ultimately hired by a company for which I was doing some clinical trials in the clinical laboratory. And based on that, I had some ideas for a product. And this was probably the most impactful thing that ever happened that led to the rest of my career. So I had this idea for a product. It wasn't something the company was specifically working on. I was very junior, and what they allowed me to do was stay there after hours, use the laboratory to invent. So it was kind of an intrapreneurial thing.
Did they own the IP?
What?
Would they own the IP?
They would ultimately own the IP. They did. And interestingly, I was working on this initiative. What it was is I was looking to build a diagnostic kit for to diagnose a condition called von Willebrand's disease. And at that point, only specialty laboratories could do it. And I wanted to create a kit that any laboratory would be able to do that screening test, that diagnosis. And I'm not going to go into what it was all about, but I was working on this test. I had this idea, and actually the breakthrough ended up being one of those serendipitous things where I made a little mistake in doing what I was doing one day, and it was that mistake that ended up being my breakthrough. And we ultimately launched this kit. And at that point in time, I had to kind of learn business stuff on the fly. Like I was working on creating, doing the pricing structure and doing, the cost analysis without really ever having the education for doing standard cost and all those kind of things that one would do, and writing the manufacturing specifications and
so trial by fire.
And creating, the customer service knowledge base and all of those kind of things. Ultimately, we launched the product. It was a wild success as far as things go in that space. It became actually an industry standard. It doubled the volume of the company I was working for. But you ask about the IP. At this point in my career, I was making $17,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
And I got a $200 bonus for my invention. And
why was that?
Why was it? Because it was a privately owned company. I had a fairly junior title, and the company didn't see me in the bonus pool.
But, why would you stay in the company after they gave you a $200 bonus?
Because I was building my capabilities, my experiences, and I was given the opportunity to be very entrepreneurial and create things. And at that point in time, the creation and the purpose and my expertise, and I was building a great reputation too. And to me, at that point in my life, that was actually more important than the income. So
even though you you didn't feel valued, you felt that you could at least learn and grow.
Yeah, and it was, there is, and I've shared this aspect of when people talk about being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur oftentimes requires you convincing people to fund you and give yourself money. But if you're in an organization that allows you to be creative and entrepreneurial with their money, which this company was allowing me to do, and they were getting the benefit out of that. I was getting the benefit out of just getting that intrinsic growth. But just to finish off the story, ultimately, that's when I decided, and I was in the hallway one day, and this was kind of a sad thing. I'm overhearing the head of sales arguing with the CEO of the company, saying, where can I find a salesperson for $30,000 a year unless I hire a med tech? And I'm thinking, I'm a med tech, so med tech equals low salary. And so I thought I better just kind of rebrand myself and change my equity from being a med tech who works in the lab to being a business development executive. And so I went back to school.
Did MBA?
I got my MBA, and I expected really staying in that.
So that really changed. That changed the trajectory for you. That just overhearing that conversation.
Well, part of it did. It took me into...
Oh, how long did you stay with the company for?
Well, I ended up transitioning into marketing for a while, but ultimately I had to go back into the lab to do some product development oversight because they replaced me when I moved into marketing with a PhD scientist who... brilliant man, but couldn't get out of his own way. It was one of those things when somebody is a subject matter expert in something, they oftentimes can't see the the forest for the trees. And they get so deep in the details that they don't look outside. And a lot of times the answers to business in general, but even in product development, it comes from unexpected places and outside things. And I'll give you a quick example of what happened. So this PhD scientist is going to, I had an idea for a product. And the product was we manufactured laboratory reagents that would come in little bottles, and you'd reconstitute them with water. And they took up a lot of space. And in the particular area we were working in, hospital laboratories would want to buy like a large supply, like an entire lot of the reagents, because whenever they switched reagents, they had to go through another calibration process with their controls and everything to reset everything. And that was lengthy and expensive. So they wanted to buy a whole lot of whatever it was. So we're making these laboratory reagents, and they're in bottles, and a lot of the companies that were making these reagents would have a service where they would basically inventory for the hospitals and distribute for them. And we weren't in a place to support that kind of distribution, really. We're a small private company. So I had this idea of, can we make instead of having everything in the jars that you reconstituted, can we do things as little tablets? And so that we could put basically a full lot into a kind of a small cube that they could store. And so we hired somebody from the pharmaceutical industry that made pills that came from, I think, McNeil, that had Tylenol or something. And he starts this process of starting to turn these reagents into tablets. And he's going through this process, and I'm walking by the lab and looking in the window, and he has this group of development people making these things into slugs and chopping them up and going through sieves, and I'm seeing powder flying all over the place. And he'd start off with this supply, and at the end of it all, he'd end up with tablets that had about 60% of the functioning that they should, and about 60% of the full quantity. And so things just weren't happening. And this is going on for like a year or so. And finally, the CEO of the company, the owner of the company, says, you got to go in there and figure out what the guy is doing. Observe that the pharmaceutical industry is going through this process to make tablets. And you're doing it very manually. There's got to be a way to do this more easily. What would you do when you're developing things for the pharma industry? And I ended up calling a supplier of lab equipment, and I brought him in and I said, okay, how do we prototype tablets? And he brings in this thing that looks like a wearing blender, and you put all the material into it, press a button, and then like 20 seconds later, you have this material that's ready to go that you put into tablets with like close to 100% of the results and 100% of the quantity in there. And as a result of that, the PhD scientist lost his job, sadly, but I was sent back into the lab to take over the lab again, which isn't what I wanted to do. I really wanted to build businesses.
You were a victim of your own success.
And so what ultimately happened is I met a man in an elevator in Las Vegas named Steve Bush, and Steve decided that he was going to marry me, as he tells the story, and when he met me in the elevator. And he shows up in Philadelphia a week later, and he keeps coming back. And the next thing I know, I was getting calls from recruiters in Minnesota, which is where he was living at the time. That's when I knew he was serious. And I interviewed for a lot of different positions in the medical device space, but ultimately this company called Minnetonka Corporation, which was in beauty and personal care products, skincare, they had a medical division for basically medical skincare products. And they didn't know the difference between really pharmaceuticals and medical device. They just know they wanted a medical marketing person, and they hired me. And I first launched a wart treatment product. I was kind of known as the wart queen for a while. Great reputation to have. even in that situation, again, I'm launching a pharmaceutical product in a company that was a consumer products company. I had to figure things out on my own to a large extent. And I was working with a much more limited budget than most pharma companies would have. And you learn to be scrappy and learn how to bootstrap things and create new ways of doing things as well as new products.
Okay, so I want to wind back a bit because something you said sat with me. You said it's harder for women to raise money than for men. And you said there were 2 reasons for that.
Well, there are a lot of reasons for it.
But you highlighted two reasons why. You want to go and jump into those and give me some more color?
One of the reasons is I think women, they need to, for the most part, believe that they are 100% qualified and capable of delivering what they're going to deliver. Where men, I think if they're 60% sure, maybe not even, they'll show up with confidence. There's a kind of a vulgar way of putting it is men make it up, women go to confession. And so, a woman will show up and be fully qualified but express a lot of self-doubt. Use a lot of qualifying words and we have a harder time evoking that sense of confidence. And that's why I think having that early entrepreneurial experience and having a track record is helpful for women.
Well, what advice would you give to women who are in that situation right now where they don't think that they're competent enough? They don't think they're skilled enough?
You mean learn to lie like a guy?
No, but how do you bridge that gap? Because
I'll tell you what, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, even in recently in the recruiting process for a new CEO at a large public company Tupperware, that's been in the news for having going concern issues, which, it's an amazing brand and a spectacular brand and a really great company. Lost its way a little bit, and recruiting who I believe was absolutely 100% the perfect CEO, and her concern was, what if I can't turn this around? And when you look at it, and coach, it's a win-win situation for her. I mean, if she doesn't turn it around, she has that experience, and she has a CEO experience, but now CEO experience in a public company, and if she doesn't turn it around, it's that it was too big of a hill to climb. I think she's going to turn it around. I'm already seeing the evidence of that. But if she does turn it around, which I expect she will, I mean, think about what that means in terms of, being a CEO, a female CEO in a public company, which is a limited thing. But, just getting that aspect of having the confidence and projecting that confidence is something that, there are so many times I've been invited to participate in women's leadership meetings and women's
you're an icon. You're an icon for so many women.
But what I find a lot of times is when women get together, with all due respect to some of my and most of my amazing female colleagues, there is a tendency to go a little bit kumbaya-ish, which is not at all surprising because one of the things that women and it relates back to the way our brains are wired. Women are more wired to work in a team structure and in a flat playing field, where and we grow up that way. If men are more used and boys are more used to existing in a hierarchy. It's changing today. It's changing a lot, but especially when I grew up, you had men's sports, and everybody kind of understands who is the star on the team, who is the bench warmer, but at the end of it all, everybody goes out and has, a hot dog together. For women or for girls, there was there's no winning in dolls. You play and you play and you play until somebody gets mad and goes home. And so in this kind of flat playing field, when a woman elevates herself above other women, the dynamics get kind of weird. So women tend to almost pull themselves down a little bit. And that's something we're learning to get over. And I think we can do better in terms of...
Pull themselves or pull others down?
What?
Pull themselves down?
They'll take themselves down to it. You know, and it, you'll see it happening, for instance, if a woman has a female executive assistant, a man's observing a woman manager in business, and she goes to her assistant and she kind of chats her up. You know, how's your weekend? How are the kids? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, I like your shoes, yada, yada, yada. Here is this report I need formatted by Wednesday. Can you get that done for me? Looks like she's wasting time and killing time, but she goes up to the woman and says, you know, I need this by Wednesday, bitch. You know, it's just like, okay. Whereas, so you're kind of bringing yourself down to, you know, an equal level. Whereas if I had a male assistant and I asked if he could get it done by Wednesday, it would sound a little bit more like it was optional for him. Whereas, and it's just that the way women...
Not sure I agree with that. I have a male personal assistant.
But you're a male.
Okay, so maybe that's...
You're a male.
But yeah, he's great. He gets the stuff done that I need to.
And it's funny
never
how,
optional.
Yeah, but and you would be great with a female assistant. But and again, it's changing. But I can give you an example of you know, I'd get on an airplane, for instance, and I would oftentimes, because I traveled a lot, be sitting in the first class cabin, and I'd get on first, have my coat in my hand. Men would start to get on. The female flight attendant
doesn't take your coat.
Doesn't, like, I'm invisible. Now, it's gotten better. I will say, as I've gotten older, it's gotten much better. But they'd take the men's coats, they'd offer the men's drinks, and I'm still sitting there holding my coat. But the best example of this, and I started learning a lot about the female-male cultural dynamics, the gender cultural dynamics in business when I was at Johnson & Johnson. And because of understanding this and understanding these dynamics that we don't even realize we're doing, they're kind of hardwired.
Very subconscious.
They're very subconscious, but they are very much hardwired. And a lot of it relates to the reproductive imperative, supposedly. So I'm getting on an airplane. It's a small regional plane. There's not even a first-class cabin on it. And I am so compliant because I know if I get out of line, I'm going to be put in my place. So I get on this plane, and I'm right behind the bulkhead. And so I take my purse, my handbag, and I put it in the overhead because there's no space in front of me. And I take my headphones, and I tuck them in beside me on the seat. And this was back when you had to wait until the ding went off to use your electronic devices and all of that. So I'm sitting there with my little device, my headphones beside me, and the flight attendant comes over, and she goes, you have to put those in the overhead. She points, and I said, my headphones? And she said, yes, FAA requirements. I said, my headphones? And she just looks at me. So I hand them to her. She puts them in the overhead. She goes to the man who's sitting across the aisle from me, who's got one of these big binder portfolio briefcase kind of things sitting at his feet. And she says, we're going to have to stow that for takeoff. And he says, that's fine. Can I take something out of there first? And she says, of course. And he pulls out this great big binder and sets it in his lap. And she puts the case away. Okay, the plane takes off. The ding goes off where I'm allowed to use my electronic devices, but the seatbelt sign's still on. So I ring the flight attendant call button, and she comes over. And with very flat aspect, I say, would you please get my headphones down? And she takes them out and hands them to me. And I say, thank you. And she goes, are you going to be angry the entire flight? And I said, I think I am. And I said, you made me put my headphones in the overhead, and I watched you put that big binder in that man's lap, and that makes me think there's something about me you don't like, and that hurt my feelings. And she looks at me with this shocked and she goes, "You're right. I don't know why I did that." And for the rest of the flight, she was just tripping over herself to take care of me and make it up to me. But what I knew is what was really going on is that she was waiting on me.
Mental conditioning.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Some sort of mental conditioning, right?
Yeah. So really understanding those female-male dynamics, I think, is something that women need to be coached to understand, because otherwise they'll fall trapped to themselves as well as to some of the other biases of the male brain as well.
Well, you mentioned the male brain earlier on as the other aspect of fundraising, which is difficult, right?
Yeah. So the thing with with men, women, and we've already done it in this conversation, we tend to be a little bit like circuitous in the way we think about things. Men are very linear. And one of the things you need to learn in
part of my job, though. I got to keep you on track here.
So, bullet points, 3 bullet points, maybe 5, but really 3 for men. Where women could have 20 bullet points, but we're perfectly happy just getting to one of them in the course of anything if we come to an understanding. And that's another male-female thing. And we've actually run into that together with the women are shoppers and men are hunters. You want to kill the problem. I want to explore the problem.
You keep saying me that nail in the head video.
You're pulling the nail out of my head, which for anybody who hasn't seen it, go to YouTube and watch.
We'll post it in the notes below.
Yeah, it's not about the nail. It is hilarious. And Vinny was always wanting to pull the nail. You're always wanting to pull the nail on my head.
I was hanging out but Lori, we can fix this. Lori, we can fix this. And you just didn't want to fit.
I didn't want to fix the problem. I didn't want you to kill the problem. I wanted to understand what was the underlying aspect so I can make the decision.
Absolutely. Different brains. What advice would you give to, women out there that are like struggling with some sort of bias in the workplace? How do they deal with it?
It's first of all to understand where it's coming from. And sometimes it's to confront it head on. And, and you're seeing less and less of it. And I feel like it's almost going the opposite way right now where, and in California on I know for public company boards, and it might even be for private boards, I'm not really sure, but for public company boards, they need to have a female board member. And that aspect of diversity of the DEI. To a large extent, it's a catch-22 for women who are, the companies want to. I'm on several boards, and because I'm on several boards, I get recruited for more boards. And one of the things I will not do is I will not accept a board, even consider a board position when the primary reason I'm being called is because I have 2 X chromosomes. But it's a catch-22 for women who really want to get that board experience but don't have the board experience. So how do you create that equity? And so the one thing I really recommend to women a lot in business is spend a lot of time with men. Find a male mentor to work with and explore what some of your challenges are in navigating the male competitive model. And, to me, I've not been a believer in affirmative action because I think it's...
And as a brown person, I don't. Like, I left South Africa because I thought affirmative action was stupid.
Yeah, well, it's also insulting in a way for people to assume that I got where I was or I had the opportunities I had because of my gender. And
I get that there's this, like, issue with opportunities and lack of opportunities in certain societies and whatever. And I get that there's this path, but let's not confuse it for what it is. It's not the best people that you're hiring. It's the best based upon some filter, whether it's color, gender, or whatever else. And that doesn't make for a meritocratic society. It just doesn't. So we have to, in my opinion, we have to break down all these biases and say, let the best thrive. And if you have some disadvantage, you know what? Overcome it. Work, get there. Like, there are ways, and some of the most accomplished people you'll see from the worst backgrounds overcame it by working harder than everyone else. And I just think that and it's, people may say, "Oh, it's easy for you to say you made it." Well, I came from apartheid South Africa. I grew up in like the poorest parts of the country, and I built my way up with no rich family. Not like I had to do it myself, and that just made me work harder and try to get there. And then I think it's very insulting because when I got older in my 20s in South Africa, it was all about affirmative action and trying to hire people of color for senior roles, and it got to the point where it was actually, I made this observation, I think it was 2009, that we had this problem in South Africa where, white people couldn't get jobs. So technologists. So guys coming out of university weren't hired because the government implemented black economic empowerment rules and affirmative action. And what were these guys doing? These are highly educated, talented people. They were starting companies because they had no other option. And I made the observation back in 2009 or 10 that in 10 years, we're going to see more wealth in the hands of these people because they were pushed out of the workplace and into, entrepreneurship, and it's happened. And so and now there's this huge pushback about all the wealth that's been created, but these guys, they wouldn't get jobs. And the counterpoint to that, well, I wouldn't say counterpoint, but the complementary point to that was, I'll never forget this example. We were hiring for an accountant, I think, or it was like a COO type guy in my first company, and we had this black candidate who came in. Phenomenal guy, came from my alma mater, University of Cape Town, well educated, like really smart. I wanted to hire him, like on the spot. And I, made him an offer. He got double. He got paid double to go to a bank because they had quotas to hit. And so, what happens in this situation really is that I think people underestimate how these perverse incentives basically lock people into corporate jobs. Because now you got stuck in a corporate job, I don't think he ever left, versus being in like a startup where he could learn and then start his own company and grow from there. And I just think that we create these perverse incentives, and I just think that needs to end.
Totally. And that's actually when I mentioned I was at Temple, the Fox School of Business, with a new dean there. And since I've been on the board, which has been for several years, and a lot of the discussions is how we recruit the most desirable candidates, but there's also the aspect of wanting to have a lot of diversity. Temple does have a lot of diversity. It's in North Philly, just the geographically, it lends itself to diversity. But in trying to get the most desirable black students, for instance, and they're thinking, well, we'll throw scholarship money at them. Well, at the long and the short of it is, those students are going to be getting, scholarship offers from the Ivies.
Exactly,
Penn is, right, a couple miles away, and but. On the other hand, and I know from the Alliance of CEOs, discussions about companies looking to acquire more diversity in their talent, whether it's female, whether it's people of color, but the talent pool isn't there. So what I have been focused on, and I did the 501c3 we had at Rodan and Fields was, from my perspective, about creating talent pools at a much younger age, starting at the high school or even elementary school level, where you create incentives and opportunities for people from, more challenged economies or and different or where there's lower expectations, and you cultivate that belief in oneself, and also the preparation you need to get to where it's going. That organization, by the way, is called Build On, and it's really about breaking the cycles of poverty and low expectations by developing leadership in very challenged environments at a young age. And it's just breathtaking to see what kind of, how you can change lives by focusing on leadership and education at a very young age. So from the university perspective, I'm saying we need to work with companies to start identifying talent at a much earlier stage and cultivating that talent through the university and into the workplace so that we create that leadership.
Yeah, so I can say that I think that the cost of education is one of the biggest factors with lack of diversity, because if we have these, if we have this high cost, even at preschool level, like preschool education is not paid for by the government, right? So you can have free schooling, public schools, but you don't have public preschools, which means that in the most formative years, kids from underprivileged communities don't get what they need, brain development wise, to so when they enter first grade, they're behind their peers, because first grade is free, but the preschool isn't. So the parents who are paying, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month to put their kids in preschool to enhance their learning, they have an advantage. And it's sad that it does fall in sort of underprivileged communities that they don't get this benefit. And then that has a ripple effect over that child's life and career. Like kids in the first, 6 years, and then I'd say the next 6 years of their life, those first 12 years are formative. You'll look at kids going to high school and they don't have a good solid foundation for the prior, 12 years, they're going to struggle.
Well, Malcolm Gladwell's actually done several podcasts on education, and the reality is you need to get to kids really young, and at really early ages. Pretty much all of the the vast majority of my nonprofit work and donations, contributions, all revolve around education, one way or another. It's been an important part of my life, and
likewise.
I know that probably one of the most valuable things that my family did was to move us to the suburb that we moved us into, where it was a more affluent suburb, but we were in the more economically challenged part of that suburb. But it put me in a school that was a very highly rated nationally education system, and I know that.
And that was free, right?
Yeah, that was public school.
Public school. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my sort of philanthropic work in South Africa is linked to just education. Donations to educational institutions.
And one of the things I've got to say, I'm really proud of the high school, because now that high school is, it's a majority minority. Mm-hmm. So the high school is majority people of color, but they still graduate. Over 90% of the students and over 70% of the students go on to higher education. And so maintaining a culture of academic excellence, it doesn't need to be an economic situation, but unfortunately it's evolved to that for so many areas.
I want to touch on, you overcoming breast cancer recently and how that changed, your view of the world and how it changed your philosophy on business and life. And just some thoughts on that, and it's something I think a lot of people struggle with. Obviously, it's cancer's become pretty widespread, and if you haven't had it, someone who has type of thing.
Yeah, everybody knows somebody.
Yeah. So how did you deal with it?
Yeah, and I didn't think it could happen to me. I always thought I was, the healthiest person on the planet. Although I will say, throughout most of my career, I did. I arguably wasn't good at supporting my body's resilience to stress. I didn't sleep enough. I used to joke, I'll sleep when I'm done. And I would average somewhere between 4 and 6 hours of sleep a night. 6 was unusual. It was, And my husband would say, you got to sleep more, you're going to get cancer. And at that point, I didn't believe there was a connection between sleep and cancer. It was like, cancer schmancer, I'm fine. I've got things to do. And it wasn't that I couldn't sleep. It's that I just was too busy to sleep. And I used to consider that one of my core competencies, that I could work more hours a day than anybody else.
We've all been there.
Yeah. And you know what? What I've learned is that doesn't really support your productivity. Anyway, when I retired, and I'm using the air quotes there because I kind of screwed up my retirement. But when I left Rodan,
by starting another company.
What? And that was actually the outcome of the breast cancer experience. I had a hard time. I lost my sense of identity when I stepped out of my career. As much as I wanted to retire and as much as I was in, a financially fortunate place, I still felt like I needed to do something to be productive. I had a non-compete at the time. I thought I was going to stay on as an advisor and a board member to Rodan and Fields when I left. And, it took me probably about a month longer than it takes most people to realize that the incoming or the new CEO doesn't want the old CEO breathing down her neck, doesn't need the old CEO breathing down her neck. And I had to separate more completely than I expected to. But I had a non-compete, which in the state of California is actually a hard to enforce thing, but I was going to comply with it. And so I was, keeping myself busy on the sidelines, but in the meantime, I'm getting calls from all kinds of people wanting to start companies in the beauty or skincare space or in the direct selling space. And I'm saying, I'm going to have to defer until my non-compete is up. And that is going to be July 1st of 2017. July 1st of 2017, I get my breast cancer diagnosis.
Same day.
On that very day.
Wow.
I had found a little lump. It was through a self-exam, and I made a habit of doing self-breast exams, which for any women listening, please, please, please know your body really well, because mammography completely missed it. Even when I could feel the tumor there, mammography still didn't see it. And in the state of California, when you have mammography, you get the results and it says, no abnormalities detected. But then there's this little statement at the bottom that's the disclaimer that says you have dense breast tissue, basically, so all bets are off. And, as a human being, I look at the no abnormalities, yay, ignore the disclaimer because that's not going to apply to me, right? And it turns out that was, it's a thing. So anyway, I get the diagnosis and I found the little tumor, went for it. And the days that followed shortly after that, I started getting calls from people who I had said, call me back on July 1st. And, we're coming into the 4th of July weekend. And I'm saying, look, I don't know. All I had was the diagnosis, but no staging, nothing else. And, it's a scary diagnosis. I was feeling that I had found it early enough that it was going to be okay, but I was saying to people who were calling me, and one of the people who called me was a plastic surgeon, a good friend, Dr. Paul Nassif, who I was going to work on a project with. Some people may know him from the TV show Botched. And we're talking about, I'm telling him, I don't know if I can work with you. I don't know what my next weeks, months, or whatever are going to look like. But, he was empathetic, but, also talked about, well, let's give it a few days. I said, but let me ask you some questions about surgery and reconstruction. And he goes, well, I'm a facial surgeon, but to really understand things, you need to talk to my friend, Dr. Christy Funk. And she is like the go-to person, specialist for breast cancer. She's often on television. She's the surgeon that did the surgery on Angelina Jolie and Sheryl Crow. And so, this was on the 4th of July, actually. I'm having this conversation. And this is, having amazing people in my life. Christy called me that day. She actually called me on the 4th of July to talk to me about my breast cancer. And I've got to say, having the opportunity to really have somebody who takes the time to work with you and help you understand. So I make the decision to go very aggressive in my treatment and my surgery and do the prophylactic bilateral mastectomy, hopefully not too much information for you, with reconstruction. And what I come to learn is that the surgeon that you're doing the most of the work with is your plastic surgeon, more so than your breast surgeon as you're going through this reconstructive process. And my breast surgeon is a leading surgeon, my reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Ritu Chopra in Beverly Hills. Getting to all of this, though, what I learned through all of this is I had Dr. Christy Funk, who really cared about all of me in terms of who I was and what was important to me, how old I was, the decisions about what the treatment should be, took time to talk to me. Dr. Chopra actually made house calls, and we're chatting about life and business in general. My oncologist that I've been seeing since 2017 took a personal interest in my life. When I would have a question for the oncologist, he would call the breast surgeon, and so I was getting this very holistic approach to breast cancer. But also importantly, at the time Dr. Funk, Christy Funk, was treating me, she was writing her book, Breast, the Owner's Manual, and which was really a book more on women's health. And she was giving me the galleys to read and give her feedback on it. And I got very close to her. Also, I was introduced to somebody from the Osher Center of Integrative Medicine from UCSF. And another friend gave me a book, The Telomere Effect, that her friend, Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who is a Nobel laureate, had just written, and that just came out. And I'm starting to learn about, after having spent my whole career pretty much, or the majority of my career, in beauty and skincare and focusing on lotions and potions to keep this looking young and vibrant and youthful, that if you're not managing what's going on in your head and internally, that, all the cosmeceuticals in the world aren't going to keep you youthful looking. And I started, as a result of all this, and this is where I have this big belief in return on luck. And my breast cancer was a very
I love that, return on luck.
A bad luck event. But, people all have good luck and bad luck events in their lives, but fortunate people are people who take those events.
Take lemons and make lemonade.
Yes. And, I started to really think about my well-being as well as the industry that I was working in, beauty and skincare, on a far more holistic level. And if I didn't create, I'm one of the first to really advocate something that is, I call integrative beauty. And it's the skin, body, mind connection. And so as a result of having these amazing doctors all working with me, not just my cancer or my surgery, and caring about who I was, and with Chopra, we had lots of discussions when I'd go in about the beauty industry and skincare. And he had a vision of developing his own product line. And one day he cuts to the chase and says, would you take a look at my ideas? And I said, can I put my clothes on first? And which was kind of awkward, but it was a day at the office for him. But so I take a look at what he was doing, and he had this interesting idea of bringing together the best of Eastern tradition and Western cosmeceuticals for a skincare line. But I said to him, the world doesn't really need another skincare line. Everybody and their dog seems to be launching a skincare line these days. But what the world needs is a far more integrative approach to beauty. And you treat your patients that way. If you're going to do something, bring something to market, start with a need. And this is, a need as opposed to coming up with a clever answer. So that's really how my current company came to be. Solvasa.
That's amazing, Lori. Well, I wish you luck with that. I know you're going through some great product development changes, and there's some really good things happening.
Didn't expect to be here at this point in my life.
But like I said, the one thing, you've been excellent at everything except retiring.
I've made my share of mistakes.
But I'm sure you'll, Well, actually, on that topic, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life that you wish you could undo?
Oh, the biggest mistake in my life?
That you could undo?
I don't know if I've made huge life-changing mistakes, but from a business perspective, and I would say it's probably Solvasa, my current company. And I think I started the company without clarity as to my why. why I was doing it.
You think you were just doing it because you felt it was a natural extension of what you'd just been through?
No, not really.
Okay.
Well,
why did you start it
If I
then?
had to dissect it, which I actually spent some time and had a lot of conversations when I was trying to make a decision to go forward, I think I started it because I had to fully scratch that founder itch, if you will. So at Rodan and Fields, I technically wasn't a founder. I took the lead at the company as a pivot in terms of the go-to-market strategy. It was basically a relaunch, so started from ground zero. But I wasn't the founder. So I thought this is going to be my opportunity to take what was purely my vision and, in conjunction with Ritu Chopra, and build something that was completely transformative from the ground up. But I didn't really understand that what being a founder meant, because I was thinking of it in the context of what my role was at Rodan and Fields, where Dr. Katie Rodan and Dr. Kathy Fields, who I totally adore, it was such a privilege to work with them. They were the founders. I was the CEO building the company. What I didn't realize is and this, excuse me if it sounds a little arrogant, but I didn't have a Lori Bush as the founder. And I didn't want to take on the CEO role, which I didn't at first. And I didn't want to step back into a 24/7 operating role in a business again. And I thought I can hire people to do that. But, and I thought that I could coach from the sidelines and say something that people would immediately get and understand. Like, one of my philosophies in business has always been treat every dollar like it's your last.
Yeah.
And get the greatest possible return on everything you do. And I think that entrepreneurial experience where I found myself through my career oftentimes being the master of what I would think of as pet projects. Somebody got an idea and there's a project. It has no budget. It's not consistent with where the company is or what it's doing, but the CEO or somebody wants this done, it would land in my lap. And those were some of the greatest learning opportunities for me, how to bootstrap. And in the case of Solvasa, we actually raised a decent amount of money out of the blocks. And I turned down money because my feeling was, and what I've experienced is, if you have money, you spend it. If you don't, you get really creative.
Very true.
And there was a lot of spending going on. We overbuilt infrastructure in ways that weren't really that necessary for the business at the early stage. And as a result, I pretty much had to step in and restructure the go-to-market strategy. I mean, it didn't help that we launched in January of 2020. And a lot of things got blown up and things that
But you're still going and you're still trying to
We're still, I haven't failed yet.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't bet against you. What is your? I'm going to give you a couple of quick questions here. What's your favorite book recommendation that you give to people?
Oh man, I'm such a book junkie.
I know.
But I think that the very top of my list, I'm going to go with Predictably Irrational.
Okay.
Dan Ariely. It's behavioral economics, but I've ripped pages literally almost out of the book and said, this is what we're going to do.
I've watched his stuff on YouTube. He's really good. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. What daily habit do you have that you think other people should do?
Intermittent fasting.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
I was an early adopter, a really early adopter.
It clears your mind, actually.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's why.
What's the best bit of financial advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh. I think it's probably the idea of...
Besides me telling you about Bitcoin, which you didn't listen to.
I didn't listen to. And I am, what I will say is
Back in 2014, I think.
I am a shitty investor. So the advice I would give to others is do the opposite of what I do, because I get seduced by people I like and good ideas, and without really sometimes doing as much due diligence as I should. But I think probably the best financial advice is, go 85% very safe in your investments, and go wild with 15%.
Do you remember the time I told you I'm very scared of bonds?
Yeah.
You see what's happened recently? I was like, I've been the anti-bond guy for years. It took a while because I was way ahead of the pack. I think 2017, 18, I was like,
I didn't listen to that advice, by the way.
Okay.
That was, you were telling me at the start of COVID, just basically, get out of the market, get out of everything, and I didn't really take that advice.
The start of COVID was probably a bad time to listen to me, but eventually I think the bond thing really turned around. It's been horrible this past 2 years.
So I haven't been really good at taking financial advice.
Can you give us something good?
What?
What would you give as advice?
Oh gosh, I'm not the right person to get financial advice from.
We'll skip that.
But I am learning a lot more. But I'm just coming out of a series of board positions on SPACs, and I guess basically the best advice I could give is, do your due diligence before you invest.
Do your own research.
Yeah.
Give me a common misconception about business or life that you'd like to set the record straight on.
Yeah. I think the most common one, I actually did a keynote on this at a university for a graduating class in business school. And I think it's that there's no such thing as work-life balance. But what I do believe is that you get the most joy out of your work and your life when you find that opportunity for that work-life mashup. That letting your life's advise and support your work, and your work to be part of the joy in your life.
Absolutely. I can't remember who said it, but it was, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
It was, who said that?
Yeah. I joke that, the term work-life balance didn't even enter the U.S. vernacular until the year after I was out of graduate school, so I missed the memo, basically.
Okay, and if you could go back in time and meet one person throughout history, who would it be?
Oh, gosh. Throughout history, I would probably, who would it be? Because I think of people who I'd like to meet now, but I had a real, I would probably say Christopher Reeves, and I was a huge, just in awe of how somebody could not have been in a more horrific situation in his life. And
the irony of his situation is like,
Superman.
It makes you believe in God. Like, this could not be a random occurrence.
And trapped in this, in this failing body. But what he did to contribute and help support others and continue to operate businesses and things in that situation, I was just always in awe of that. So.
Yeah. Good choice.
It's probably, if you gave me more time to think about it, I might come up with something else. But I was always so impressed by that.
He's a really good one.
Yeah.
I mean, Laurie, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me here, and really appreciate having you on the show.
Well,
and I think we'll put all your social media profiles in the section below, and
just below. It's not about the nail.
Exactly. We'll have that as well. But just quickly, what's your handle on Twitter, Instagram?
Laurie H. Bush. I was pretty early on, so I've got a short one.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So people can find you there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.